me. Right, so, waterfall. Yeah, everyone loves a waterfall. Gorilla Glue, gluing the polystyrene together is normal. Have to weigh it down though, because it expands, blah blah blah. Everyone knows this surely, no? No. Anyway, here we are, building up the waterfall structure out of extruded foam. I don't know why I use extruded foam, it's much more expensive. It's good for a base, perhaps expanded polystyrene next time. But I had lots of bits left over, so I used them. And here we go, just keep building it up, building it up, building it up, building it up, building it up. Building it up. Done? No? Really? Yes! Right, and then hot wire foam factory sculpting tool. What a brilliant bit of kit this is. I'd quite like the router, but I can't afford it at the moment. But it makes just carving it so much easier than using a knife. Knife has its benefits as well. But you know, I'm just after a rough shape at the moment, and I'm still adding bits of scrap foam here, just building up and building up the landscape. And it's amazing how these things turn from just a big pile of foam into something really quite extraordinary. Well, even if I say so myself. And there you see I was using paper and masking tape to smooth over the edges, and I cover that in plastic cloth, which gives it a rigid undercoat and makes it a very smooth kind of landform. And I cover that in Sculptamold, the usual stuff, everyone uses this. I put it on fairly thickly because it dries much quicker, and if you put it on and it's too mushy, then it takes ages to dry. It probably won't ever dry actually if you put it on too wet. So put it on fairly thick. Not too thick though, there's a balance. Anyway, smooth it over with a wet finger. And Woodland Scenics rock moulds, which I've spelt the English way. And I think this is stone cast plaster actually. It's just a bit harder, gives it a bit more of a hard wearing rock. But these rock moulds are brilliant. Lots of different kinds of rock moulds. I make a lot more, well I always think I make a lot more than I'll need, and then I end up using them. So actually I haven't used more than I needed. But this is about, I don't know, 2 hours later I think I left it. They never come out perfect. They always break a bit, but that doesn't matter because you're not after the exact rock. And then you just piece it together like a puzzle really, until you're happy, paying careful attention to the kind of stratus, is that the word? The lines in the rock, the fissures, those sorts of things. And then you stick it all down with more Sculptamold, or you could use plaster. I think next time I'd use plaster actually, because plaster takes the paint better. Although Sculptamold is plaster, it's just impregnated with, well, it's toilet paper impregnated with plaster. So next time I'm going to use plaster to smooth in the rocks and to mould them all into each other. Now you keep doing that until you're happy. I think this looks really quite nice at this stage. I always like the clean kind of white look. Textured goop, which is equal parts PVA glue, grout, Sculptamold and emulsion paint. This is my homemade one. It's probably derived from lots of people's recipes, but this is one I find works the best. It goes rock hard. And I could have used the ground texture directly over the top of that, but as you can see by that edit, I went to bed because I was tired. So I used dilute Mod Podge matte here, and then sieved dried soil and grout. I think it's about 50-50-ish of both those, and that gives a really nice soil texture. And it was applied through a stocking, which is a common thing, I think. And now it's time to paint the rocks, so I give it a nice wash of an acrylic kind of grey colour, and then a burnt umber spotting over about 1/3 of the rocks, I guess, something like that, and mop up the excess. Spray it all in scenic glue to seal it, and then when that's dry, go over the whole thing in a black wash, which really accentuates the fissures and the cracks. Now I'm painting the base. I've gone for a kind of dark green, kind of a tropical green, though I think initially I was after a moorland look on this, but it kind of ended up somewhere probably more tropical. Anyway, it's a happy accident perhaps. And you go lighter around the edges to simulate depth in the middle, and that's where the waterfall is going to be pouring in from, over the top there. And it's starting to really come alive now, the model. And at this point I realised I wanted higher banks on the river, and I also wanted another waterfall to come in from the side, because I thought it was looking a bit, well, I don't know, two-dimensional is the wrong expression really, but I wanted it to be more dynamic anyway, the whole scene, so I just added a load more Sculptamold over the top of the ground. Perhaps I should have sanded the soil off, but I didn't. And so I smoothed it all over. I've built up the extra bits I want, and then when that's dry, I painted more of the goop over it, so it would go rock hard, then more of the riverbeds again. So now I've got 2 waterfalls, which is twice the work, perhaps twice the fun. I don't know. I'm blending in the edges with a bit of emulsion paint there, which just happened to be a good match. Don't really usually use emulsion paint. I don't know what I'm doing there. I think I was just adding a little ink to accent the edges of the banks. Right, now, privet hedge, or privet bush, and I'm actually using this to create tree roots out of the banks, because I'm going to put trees on the model later on, and riverbanks usually have roots coming out the edge. These are probably a bit too big, so next time I would use probably actual roots perhaps, but they look alright, they look quite nice. Stick those in with Mod Podge matte. And bedtime again there, and here we go, starting on the waterfall. So I used silicone sealant as the base of the waterfall for the main structure, the main body of it, because it dries, well, within half an hour, less than that, and you start taking it off here, and just in strips that I stippled with a cocktail stick. And I start putting it down the body of the waterfall. The clear stuff here doesn't have to be clear really, because as you'll see later on, there's so much froth on the top that you don't really see it, but it just means that if you can see through any parts of the waterfall later on, then you're going to see bits of the rock as well. It just adds a bit more of a realistic look. And masking tape here with wood glue to seal up the edges, because I'm just about to start pouring the resin. And as you can see up in the top left there, I've forgotten one of the dams, but never mind. I get away with it, I think. And it's a 2-part epoxy, which I tint with acrylic paint. You could use inks as well. I'm breathing over it there to get rid of the bubbles, but it's a 50-50 mix that you mix for, well, this stuff actually doesn't take that much mixing. It's about 2 minutes. And you keep dabbing it on, and I pour it all the way over the waterfall here, because that starts to lend the more body again and more consistency to the water flow. And several layers of resin this took. Each one was slightly lighter tint than the one before. And here I've thinned out a bit more of the silicone, which I was just adapting the waterfall with, and I use polyfibre. This is the first layer of polyfibre, which is teddy bear stuffing essentially. I think I got this from a cushion actually, but that gives a nice sense of water breaking under the surface, and it then gets yet a further coat of resin. And now this gives the real wet look of the froth as it tips down and soaks into the polyfibre. And that's the basic structure of the waterfall done. Yet more resin. I think I went through a whole pot of resin on this one. And this is the lightest coat over here. It's a transparent look, so where it meets the rocks, you can actually see the rocks underwater there, you know. Oh look, more resin. I've forgotten how much I put on this actually. Anyway, oh yeah, there, I'm doing bits I missed the time before. Bearing in mind, all of this resin, it takes 24 hours to fully cure. So this is quite a long-winded approach, perhaps. Maybe it just does take that long. But anyway, right, it's dried by now, because otherwise I wouldn't be mucking about here with a paintbrush. What I've done, this is glass filler, micro bubbles, so it's resin filler, with gloss medium, which is acrylic based, and some good quality white acrylic paint, which I create the froth undercoat with, and I stipple it a bit really, but I really you can apply this quite thickly, and there's times in this model process where you think, oh, I've ruined it, you know, but you just got to trust the process, because it will end up looking good. Mod Podge, which I'm blowing around with a straw to give really realistic ripple look, though later on I used an air can, which is even better. I wish I'd used it then, but I didn't think of it. You live and learn. And more polyfibre. Now this is the final layer of polyfibre, and if I'm honest, the waterfall is far too powerful for this particular pool, that flow of river, but nah, who cares? You know, it's a model, it's meant to look slightly exaggerated, because I think when things look too real in a model, they end up not looking real enough, if that makes sense. You know, when people don't exaggerate things, or they make things slightly too natural looking, not with those colour pops, etc., then it ends up just looking a little bit messy, which I know why people want to make things look as real as possible, but I think with models the secret to doing that is almost to make it look slightly unreal. Anyway, I'm using full strength Mod Podge matte here because this is the base coat for the glue for my static grass, which I use a PECO static grass applicator because it's all I need. It does the job, and I use PECO 6mm static grass here, which is I think where my moorland started to become more tropical, because this grass is almost too orangey yellow, but it's an autumn mix. I do like it, and I'm putting a bit of 2mm around the edge there just to blend it all in. And Woodland Scenics ground foams. Woodland Scenics ground foams are absolutely fantastic. They're really fine consistency. But I also using some dried up leaves from my garden, and I'm using coarse turf to make bushes. There's again Woodland Scenics. I think everyone who models landscapes uses Woodland Scenics stuff. Woodland Scenics and Knock. But the Woodland Scenics ground cover products are they're just brilliant. They just transform a model, and I'm covering it all up here because I'm spraying it with isopropyl alcohol, which is a wetting agent, and then scenic glue. My scenic glue is 1 part matte medium, 3 parts water, and then some dishwasher rinse aid, just a couple of drops of that, and then I'm just dropping over more of all of that onto the denser areas. And here is the Mod Podge gloss again, and there's the air can I was talking about earlier on, and that really does produce very realistic looking ripples. So there, I would use that next time, since I don't have an airbrush yet. Hoping to get one for Christmas. Maybe he'll bring me one. Anyway. Woodland Scenics Fine Leaf Foliage. Now, this stuff is great for modelling low-lying but slightly more three-dimensional bushes, because they've actually like it's got a twig to them. They're basically a sea foam twig with coarse turf over them, and they give a lovely three-dimensional look to the model. And you can also model trees direct with them actually, but I don't. I made my trees out of privet hedge, green polyfibre stretched over that, and some coarse foam and some knock leaves, or the knock leaves are by Gauge Master actually. Anyway, there we go, my waterfall. I hope you enjoyed it. I loved making it. It was a long project, but it was fantastic fun. Thank you very much. I hope to see you back here again. Don't forget to subscribe. Cheers.